The progress recorded in ending child labor is witnessing a setback. Now, that is the warning from the International Labour Organization, ILO. The humanitarian organization says the number of children in child labor has risen to 160 million worldwide, an increase of 8.4 million children in the last 4 years, with millions more at risk due to the impact of COVID-19. The pandemic has seen many parents lose their jobs, with more children taking menial jobs to help the family make ends meet. This is more prominent in Sub-Saharan Africa, where citizens are in dire straits. The data from the ILO highlights a significant rise in the number of children aged 5 to 11 years in child labor, who now account for more than half of the total global figure. As we commemorate the World Day Against Child Labor on June the 12th, the call is for countries to act now, prioritize investments in programs that can get children out of the workforce and back into school, establish social protection programs that can help families and save a generation that is already at risk. Lawyer and gender specialist Emalohi Robe joins me now to talk about this. Thank you for joining us,
Thank you.
Emalohi.
Good morning.
Now, this issue, the numbers are quite alarming.
Yes.
And I wonder what comes to mind for you, the concerns you have with regards to this data.
Well, more than half of that number on the global scale is in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.
And about 54% of all children in Nigeria are involved in child labor. And that is alarming. But the main issue is because of poverty. And COVID-19 has made poverty more, exacerbated poverty in Nigerian homes. And so children are recruited to help to increase the livelihood for their parents or to support their siblings. Also, COVID-19 has created a lot of orphans. And because we don't have proper social welfare programs in Nigeria, older siblings are now taking care of younger siblings. They have to work in hazardous labor. And this is an urgent need because trafficking is also increasing. So children are told, you know, there's no hope in this area. We would send you somewhere into an urban area, into a bigger city to do work, domestic servitude, agriculture, and proscription into armed conflicts, which is alarming because of the rate of banditry. Children are being recruited. And so the government needs to actually tackle social welfare systems and welfare programs for children.
According to the same report, the rise actually began before COVID-19. The rise began sometime in 2016 or a little afterwards, after 2016, because there was progress recorded. And I'm wondering, what was done differently at the time and where did it suddenly change so that before even COVID-19 started, we had started witnessing a rise?
Well, it's the economy. Nigeria is facing a lot of economical issues. Our dependence on foreign aid also affects the issue. And when parents have many more children, they're seen as a source of free labor. Now, there's a difference between child labor and domestic chores. So working within your family, you know, to do housework or helping to sell maybe some work after work, that's not child labor. But the reason why it has increased in Nigeria is because the Child Rights Act, which was established in 2003, has not been adopted in all the states in Nigeria. Only 25 states have adopted the Child Rights Act, which in essence extends human rights to children.
Right.
But even though this Child Rights Act has been adopted in Nigeria in 25 states, not much work is being done to enforce it. And this is because of cultural and religious ideas that we have. So there are some cultural and traditional norms that say, you know, children can be married off at a young age. That's also an economic recovery plan, so to speak. You know, you marry off children when they're young. And then there isn't a minimum age for work in Nigeria that is high enough. In some places, it's age 12. So there are children from age 5 all the way to age 17 involved in all kinds of hazardous work, especially also being recruited into begging on the streets that exposes them to a lot of hazardous living, trafficking into neighboring countries and countries in Northern Africa for domestic work. And it is all because of the economy and poverty. And no one is really checking to see what's happening with children. So even though these agencies exist, to check on labor and to see if child labor is being used. There isn't much regulation or enforcement, and so children continue to be exploited.
And that leads me to the next question that has to do, you mentioned the aspect of adoption of the Child Rights Act, and we've seen 25 states do that. Now, agencies that you mentioned who are existent are supposed to be engaging governments.
Yes.
On ensuring implementation, are supposed to be following up with data, are supposed to ensure that, okay, the rights of children are enforced, they are protected. I mean, why are we having these gaps? Why are we not seeing the necessary engagement?
Well, I mean, Nigeria is so complex, you know, and nobody is really checking how many children there are. So education is not legally mandated, even though it is said that, you know, basic education, children have to go to school, but nobody's checking and no one is enforcing it. And so if there's no way to check attendance, there's no way to track who's missing from school, who's your guardian, who's your parent. And that is a big issue. So if you don't know how many children there are anyway, you just see them begging on the streets and hawking, especially during school hours. There isn't any enforcement about truancy. There's no fine for parents or guardians. This issue continues.
So how do we force government to act if we say something has to be done as quickly as possible?
Well, this is why we have this International Day Against Child Labor, is ways to create awareness.
Every year, we wait after the day until the next year.
About it. So that's why awareness and activism has to continue for children. But also there's a sensitization. I don't think in general that the idea that children are vulnerable is rampant in Nigeria. Children are sometimes seen as a means for survival, you know, so I can't take care of you, I have so many of you, even access to birth control. Those are all of the things that is a more complex issue than just poverty. No one is tracking, no one's checking guardians, there isn't proper housing and homes, and everything is very much about survival. Now, governments need to just keep getting the numbers being lobbied.
Who is to give
groups.
them? When nobody is checking,
well,
nobody is
groups.
following up.
There are groups and organizations working towards ending child labor, but there also needs to be a sensitization that you can't have a 4-year-old house help. That is so improper. But there are people who, you know, go to their hometowns and they live in cities and get little children to come work for no pay also. That's domestic servitude, it's slavery.
Right.
The government needs to really see it as a big issue, because especially the numbers of children being trafficked, especially to work on cocoa farms, looking at its longer term impact on the country. If the youth are being deprived of an education, they're going to continuously remain in this lower paying labor jobs. There's no mental development, there's no health well-being, there's no access to knowledge to even demand more. So the cycle of poverty continues. So the government has to really understand that it's not just an immediate thing of, oh, they're just suffering now, they're trying to survive. If more than 54% of children in Nigeria are involved in some kind of child labor, that has serious ramifications 20 years down the line. I mean, children as young as 4 or 5 are involved in labor. And once you get into labor, and then there's also the issue of religion and culture. This whole thing of some children are witches, you know, so people don't really feel that empathy for children. There isn't an idea about innocence around it. So the government and states actually need to come around and say, we really need to enforce this Child Rights Act thing. We need to make sure, first of all, starting with education, it is compulsory. We have a way to make sure that all children are in school. Maybe feeding programs. You know, some of the other issues
some state governments, even the federal government has a feeding program.
They have the feeding programs, but what about implementation when it comes down to it? So we know that you would have funds provided for a certain project, but by the time it gets to the hands of those who are supposed to distribute or do this, we've heard about schools that actually send children out to beg for teachers or to hawk things, even though they're supposed to be in school. So there has to be really serious punishment for the exploitation of children and serious awareness that children are not laborers.
How about those whom we see by the streets who hold newborn babies begging and all of that?
It's part of the child labor and exploitation thing. And if they knew that it wasn't safe to be on the streets or to send children out to the streets or have babies on the streets, if the government had a task force, let's say, that picked up all of these kids and housed them somewhere and provided welfare for them, then their guardians would either abandon them or come to get them. And then that way we can begin to start a process of
So let's look at non-governmental organizations and private, the participation of the private sector to addressing this. How critical is it? And perhaps there are challenges that this non-governmental organization are also facing, making them not able to deliver on their mandate.
Well, funding is always the issue for NGOs and non-profits working to end inequalities in the world. The other thing, though, is also on an individual level, the informal sector, which we will call the private sector, the informal sector is very, very complicit in the use of child labor. Profitability and their bottom line is really what's more important to them. So if we have to use 3-year-olds to sift, the soil, kids are involved in carrying granite, young children. So on the individual level, choose not to employ children. In your homes. A lot of people, no matter how educated and exposed, a lot of their domestic staff are under the age of 18. And then creating more awareness about the need for this to end, and government putting resources towards homes, childcare facilities because parents feel, I can't take care of this child, I can't feed this child, let the child go into the streets and contributes to the household. But it ends up being slavery, because what happens is that whatever they earn, everything is taken from them also. So the push needs to continue. We have till 2025 to end child labor
with these numbers rising and the pandemic,
it's not going to happen.
Right.
But everyone needs to consider the fact that we're killing the future. I mean, more than 77 million children in Sub-Saharan Africa are child laborers, and they're also involved in war and conflict and banditry. And
we see what is even happening across most of the West African region.
Exactly, and that is why it is really, really important to follow through on the Child Rights Act, because in 20 years, that continues the cycle. The development of a nation and on a global scale matters in their youth.
But let's look at the efforts made by leaders of even Sub-Saharan Africa, efforts they had made to actually address this issue. When you juxtapose what they had done before and now, should they be looking at perhaps coming together to say, let's address this as a region, or countries just deal with it the way they can, because the pandemic has affected everyone?
So collaboration between governments and bodies tends to be a difficult matter because of different political, economic interests. I think on an individual scale, each country needs to say, this matters to us, and this is the way we'll tackle it, because everybody's culture, the way they see life, the way they view life is different from regions. I think Nigeria should focus, and states should take the lead. There are 11 states still left, all of them in northern Nigeria, that have still not taken up the Child Rights Act. I think other states should force them, shame them into saying that
but then they will ask these states who have domesticated it, what have you done?
Exactly.
So they can't really shame them.
Well, I think if they even say, well, fine, we've domesticated it in our state also, then we can now begin to work together and put up programs. But education really, and a focus on the importance of education, basic education up to secondary school, really, really matter. Enforcing that your children need to go to school. Kids cannot be on the streets between the hours of 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. having task force that says you need to get into school. I think that would really help to bring...
Because some would say perhaps parents of these children found on the streets should face the music. Would that be a way to go?
I think that could be a way, but you are going to be exacerbating the suffering that caused it in the first place. On a basic human level, many people don't want to put their children at risk, but desperation, circumstances, poverty makes them feel that they have no choice. So let's say you decide to punish a parent who's already poor or has a very, very low paying job that is hectic. You take them away from that source of income they already have, and then you haven't provided space or room to help the gap that would leave. It wouldn't be helpful, in my opinion.
So governments and the federal government is to take action, well,
Yes.
states taking the lead.
Yes.
Thank you so much, lawyer and gender specialist Emalohi Irogbe, for your time on the show this morning.
Thank you.